Star Wars The Last Jedi. Quickly before we move on, this is absolutely a spoiler review. There will be spoilers. I think I have to get this gripe out of the way pretty quickly. Kylo Ren really shouldn't have switched sides so easily when he and Rey met up. Felt that was a little disingenuous to his character. Just kidding. Snoke should have had less of a backstory, though. It really bogged the movie down, and there were just parts where I was like, come on, get it over with, but I'm just kidding about that as well. Really, my big gripe is that there were definitely times when I couldn't hear my own eardrums bursting because the audio was just absolutely so loud. Now, I was in the first row, so maybe that's what it was, but they could have tuned down a couple of those audio effects just a little bit. But anyway, Star Wars The Last Jedi opens not in a throwback to A New Hope, but to Empire Strikes Back, panning quickly down to the surface of the world where rebels are trying to evacuate, their headquarters having been discovered by the First Order. Now, in the opening title crawl, they say that the First Order has eliminated the Republic, the Senate, but it's really hard to keep that in mind as some of the rest of these things start to get going. So quickly, we progress through some really dope action, some really dope flying, courtesy of Poe Dameron, which is super compelling because the sequence starts to show just how close to the ragged edge the Resistance or the Rebels, whichever they are, really are. And they are, as is emphasized by the Resistance losing every bomber in their assault on a dreadnought that they've been targeting. This becomes a theme for the rest of the movie, that the Resistance is so far on the back foot against the First Order. Really makes one wonder what happened between when Return of the Jedi ended, even what happened after The Force Awakens ended, and the beginning of this movie. The Resistance is literally down to their last ship by the end of the film. Poe rebels against Vice Admiral Holdo, who is in control of this particular battle group, who's doing very little to really make a difference in this last gambit that they have to be taken, or so it seems. Poe sends Finn and Rose Tycho, who's played very well by Miss Tran, after a super hacker at the behest of Maz Kanata, in order to gain access to Snoke's personal ship so they can, stop a thing so they can escape. And that plan just ultimately falls apart. Rey learns a ton with Luke, but mostly really nothing at all. She takes several paths that Luke finds deeply questionable. She has motivations that he has a hard time understanding, and she, much like Luke and Anakin before him and before her both, makes a move that isn't perhaps wise and is against the counsel of her mentor. This doesn't really backfire, though, the same way that those other decisions somewhat did. Rey doesn't really seem tempted by the dark side of the Force, unlike Anakin and unlike we saw Luke in his confrontation with Vader. She seems to exist as the living specimen of balance in the Force, which Luke is trying so very hard to be, but never quite achieving, and as a result he ends up shutting himself off largely from the Force. And that's what The Last Jedi is all about. It's about balance. Rey's balance, Luke's balance, the balance of the Resistance on the knife's edge, the balance between Kylo and Snoke, the imbalance internal to Kylo. We see Kylo succumb to the dark side, although we've been told that Snoke is teaching him to use the balance of the light and dark, and that's what makes them unique as Sith, if you will. The same way that we've seen Anakin succumb. He kills a powerful Force user, a more powerful Force user than himself, and in hubris thinks that he's powerful enough to have it all. We see that the balance of different stories of who Kylo and Luke are and how they came to be on the paths they're on. It's this theme of balance that pushes out the last of the Jedi from relevance, from being able to offer hope. It's not the place of the Jedi any longer to offer hope. Luke couldn't, even though he went the furthest we've seen in the movies along the path of balance between light and dark. I'll get back to these themes of balance after this next segment. There are several points that are really compelling to me about The Last Jedi that I think are really worth sharing. First, the strength in numbers, that potency in war-making is not what breeds hope. Hope is born of small things, of personal interactions. Hope is born of individuals, not movements. Hope is shown powerfully at several points through the film. Hope that can only come about because of individuals reaching beyond themselves, being compassionate, being more than themselves, sacrificing. Another point that I found compelling was that it seems as if every time we see a Star Wars movie, at least in this new trilogy, we see new ways that the Force can be and is used. I think that the biggest weakness of the original and the second trilogy, episodes 1 through 6 respectively, were a lack of expansion of what being a Force user meant. I love seeing the new stuff that Force users can do. I think finally, for now at any rate, I really loved the way that the story was constructed. There was one taut tendon keeping the viewer grounded and connected to the bigger picture, all the while there were small adventures happening that kept the pace up. The characters were fantastic. The audience was really able to buy into them. There were moments of comedy, perhaps some were darker than laugh out loud funny, but there were moments of comedy that kept the tone from descending too deeply into darkness. More than that, though, it's not got another Death Star. It's not a big heroic journey for the Resistance. It's a movie about the emotional growth of Rey and the further destabilization emotionally of Kylo. They do push the boundaries of scale again, yes, with Snoke's personal ship. It's superb and it's sublime because they didn't need another Death Star. One of the things I value most about the Star Wars movies is that they never stop engaging my imagination. As a child, it was the adventure, and if I'm being honest with myself, there's still some of that. Same with the sci-fi elements, the fantasy elements, but now I wonder how they manage the logistics of ships, bases that size. I wonder how they manage to keep everything together in such a hostile environment internal to itself, and if it's tenable without a Force user at the helm. If a General Hux had control, would it be tenable? I love the scale, it's such a draw. It doesn't really exist the same way in other cinematic universes, and I really, really love that there wasn't another Starkiller base, another Death Star. I know I'm harping on that point, but I really enjoyed that fact. I love how they made the stories personal, how they made the story, how they took the story the direction of balance rather than light versus dark, like the two trilogies seem to be. The first two trilogies seem to be. It seems like this current trilogy is about balance versus a white versus black mentality. And going back to those themes of balance that I said I'd get back to earlier, the Sith only ever have Master and Apprentice from what I understand. The prophecy that brings Anakin into the story in Episode 1 is really about Anakin bringing balance to the Force by reducing the Jedi, not by eliminating the Sith. Eliminating the Sith would fundamentally put the Force into imbalance because there would only be the Jedi left. The way that Anakin's story ends in Vader is also about the balance between nature and civilization. Anakin's mother, Padme, they can't be saved by civilization, by medicine, but ostensibly they should have been able to be saved by nature, by the Force. In the original trilogy, we see Luke bringing balance to the Force by relighting that spark of light. The Sith have all but eliminated the Jedi, and Luke, in restarting the Jedi, brings back balance. This gets somewhat upset with both Vader and Sidious exiting stage left, opening a power vacuum that brings Snoke and the First Order and then Kylo to bear against the Resistance. What we see is that although Snoke may be well-balanced in comparison to a Sidious, to a Vader, even to a Kylo, he's still primarily a darkseid user. He's still draped all around in black and red, and although he adopts a yellow sarong as his mode of dress, there's still no mistaking the bitterness and the anger in his eyes. It's really interesting to me because much like Empire Strikes Back, it doesn't really feel like we've taken the next real step in the story with The Last Jedi. It feels like we might have gone back a few steps in a lot of ways. The Resistance has crumbled to a squad of 14 or so people, and Rey and Chewie and the Falcon and R2 and BB-8, sure, but they've all kind of crumbled, right, down to this tiny little band. The First Order is about to crumble with Snoke gone and Kylo unable to control his emotions whatsoever. Hux is already seriously considering regicide. Armitage Hux, by the way. We're also starting to see that same nature versus civilization or machine conflict enter the picture, no pun intended. In another way, with Luke so heavily nature and getting away from everything, he's becoming impotent. He's realized his impotence. His spark has kind of gone out. However, he's also, functionally speaking, mastered being a Force user. In my very humble opinion, The Last Jedi was a masterpiece of storytelling and of universe expanding. I'm so glad that Star Wars is in competent and in able hands, and while I'm sad that its creator isn't at the helm because of being pushed out by fans angry about Jar Jar, etc., it does seem that Disney is doing a wonderful job. I'm really looking forward to seeing it many, many more times. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention in this video. Please don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one.
Balance. It's so much bigger. I only know one truth.